subscribe today. Thank you for joining us. Today we're sitting in Chris and Viv's garden, and with me I have the lovely Chris Thompson and her daughter Yvette, and Chris's granddaughter Sarah, and my name's Nicole. And welcome. Today is a special day to celebrate the new release of our C.M.T Methode Traditionelle, named after Christine Mary Thompson. We are going to try some shortly, but this is the wine. This was started to be made in 2016 and has been on lees for that time. Made the traditional method with some amazing dosage that can never be repeated again. So some 20, 40-year-old brandy from downstairs. And also we found a lot of very old champagne downstairs, or sparkling whites, that hadn't even been disgorged yet from the 70s. So Justin Purser, our winemaker, and Bridget spent a couple of days opening all of these bottles and using the good ones to make the dosage. So we are going to taste some. It has been pre-released, but we will be releasing it at the end of this month. And there will be a video at some stage to show you how it was made. So I do want to try some. I haven't opened the bottle for a little while. It could take a little while. So anyone who's just joined us, thank you. If you do have some questions about the wine or any questions for Chris, let me know and we'll get to them. We have Lucy at the other end, so we may not be able to get back to you straight away. If not, we can do it at the end of today's live show. So this has a really lovely bouquet, sort of like apricots, stone fruits. We are sneaking a little one in because it's not released yet. So we're not releasing it because the winemaker says when you do make this sort of wine and you add a dosage, you do need to wait for that to integrate together. So you want it all combined, ready so the wine and the dosage has come together. So that's why we're not releasing it as early as we would like to. So whilst we're doing this, I'm going to firstly give a toast to Chris and to Sarah with her cup of tea. And then we're going to have Yvette speak a little bit about some of the things she remembers about the days in the winery and what Chris got up to and little things like that. So cheers. We're going to taste it.
Yes, I'm definitely. Oh, that is really good.
That's lovely. And make sure you get some.
So smooth.
Almost yelled. So, Yvette, tell us something that makes you laugh when you think of what your mum used to do.
Okay, so probably one of the mum has been such an integral part of the winery in all parts. She has worked in the vineyard, the bottling line, the sales. She's designed labels, brochures, you name it. She's done all of that. And one day during the picking season, the grape harvesting season, now hand picking, and someone has to drive the tractor in and out to collect the fruit. Anyway, so one day Mum's heading back to the vineyard, back to the winery, and she has to stop at a gate. And so she stops, gets out to open the gate, and the old Fergie, the old grey Fergie, just decides, no, it was just going to take off on its own. So the old Fergie just takes off smashes down the gate, straight off into the paddock. There's Mum and half the winery staff who had seen it all, chasing after it. So anyway, it all ended up okay. Mum came back okay, and we all got the tractor back and everything. But there was a lot of comments about women drivers, as you can imagine, after that. So we actually, having more females in our vineyard, because prior to the 70s, particularly for vintage, we used to have men doing the picking. However, the men were pretty, look, let's face it, they just weren't up to the job. They were a bit slower, they were a little bit boring, and they were so unreliable. Seriously, they would go off to the pub for lunch and often not return. So by the 70s, we decided we needed the local women because they could get the job done. They were great. They were really, really good. So we stuck with the women, and that was always the way. And we ended up with the women doing pruning. They've worked in the bottling line. They've worked everywhere. So during our vintage seasons, we would often get some international guests would come and stay, who Mum ever so graciously would host. Mum did all the cooking, the cleaning, and everything for these international people that turned up randomly all the time. And I remember one particular vintage. We had a Canadian called Dave, a Tasmanian called Phil, and a Englishman called Andrew. They all turned up to be the bucket boys. So the bucket boys' job was when the ladies, who all had a number, would call out their number to have their number marked down because we got paid by the bucket. And that would also signify that the boys had to then go and empty their bucket. So one day the bin hadn't returned from the vineyard, so they had to stop.
Sorry, guys. Grab both of those mics and hold them right up.
Who would have thought my voice wasn't loud enough? Anyway, so one day the bins went back for the girls to pick into. So they're all sitting around. One says, well, so what do we do now? So one replies, let's get the boys. So the poor bucket boys, these poor young international guests. But Mum did actually, that night, she got a bit of reward for her hospitality in the form of the boys recounting the day's activities. It was quite funny because the boys were quite entertaining in those days. So that was that was quite a funny one. Now let me think. We wrote down a few things so that we could remember. So one of the other things that we loved about vintage was the end of vintage breakup party, which was all the female pickers would come along, and it was a huge occasion every year. It was massive. Even Mum dressed up, like they all had to dress up in their finest. We'd have the hats, like Melbourne Cup has nothing on the end of vintage session, did it? Mum wore a suit one day, and it was like one of the ladies, Rhonda, she wrote a poem for the occasion. It was so good. It was just one of the highlights of the year, and I remember quite vividly as a child having to go back to school the next day and explain to the children why Mum didn't drive home. Because even though, back in those days they did a lot more. So we started exporting in the early 90s, and a part of what helped open a lot of the relationships there were people that either came to work for us or they came as visitors to buy the wine, and they'd often end up inside. Mum would have to entertain them. Dad would. It was nothing for Dad to call through to the house at 20 to 12 and say, "Oh, I've got eight journos. We'll be in 20 minutes." Or, "Oh, I've got 4 Swiss buyers here. We'll be in 20 minutes." And of course, Mum's response was always, "Oh shit." So, but within, oh, can I not say that? Oh, sorry. So within 20 minutes, Mum would produce these most amazing gourmet meals that looked like she'd spent forever producing, and it was always delicious. She could just do anything, just incredible. So Mum was sort of like the hostess of the mostess. She was amazing. Mum also did, as I said, she did the labels, she did the brochures, she did any of the sort of leaflets, any of the materials that needed to be done. Mum did all of that. It was incredible. Yeah. And not just for Bess, but Mum also was an integral part of helping the entire area. So Mum was a lot of volunteer work. So Mum was an integral part of the Great Western Viticultural Group, as were a lot of other incredible women in the area. Who I'm not going to list them all because I will forget someone, and I don't want to. I don't want to offend anyone. But there are a lot of women involved in this as well. Mum had a huge part in the viticultural group, who started the Grampians Gourmet Weekend, which is now called the Grape Escape. So back in the day when it was first started, on the Saturday they had a big day out at the Grampians, out at Hulscat on the Oval, as they do now, where they had the local winemakers and vignerons and the local restaurants showing their things. On the Saturday night, the restaurants would have big dinners, often hosted by a winemaker. And then on the Sunday, each winery would showcase their winery. So each winery would have events on. So we would have dinners, or we had the end of vintage harvest picnics. We had the scarecrows at Montara. We had the chestnuts at Langy. So, and from there, it just grew and grew into the enormous event that it is now, which has just really helped to put not just Best's, but the whole area on the map. And so Mum and a lot of the other women were like a huge part of that. So that was like Mum's been really, Mum's been very busy, plus raising 4 children and volunteering with every other sort of.
For adventurous children.
Yeah, maybe. We may or may not have moved.
That's another story.
Okay, yeah, we'll leave that one there. Yes, that might be better. But look, Mum has been such a huge part of the winery. Yeah, huge part. Like, just it's incredible, and the amount of time that Mum has put into it. It's just I don't know.
And Sarah, and now Sarah can say something about Grandma that you remember. Sarah actually works in the cellar door now on a couple of days a week with her other work.
Try it better. Oh, okay. So you will probably see Sarah in the cellar door when you pop in on a Tuesday or a Wednesday. So tell us something that you remember about Grandma.
Grandma used to always make us breakfast. And she still does, actually, like when we stay over. And she'd always make crepes with sugar and bacon. It was like, the best. She makes the best crepes in the world.
Sugar and bacon.
Well, no, because you put the bacon, it's like sugar and butter, and then you put the bacon in the middle and you roll it all up. It's really good.
That's what grandmas are for, isn't it?
Yeah. Grandma was always spoiling us. She used to so we used to sell lollies in the cellar door. So she would, every now and then we'd get she'd give us 50 cents so we could run up and buy some lollies from the front of the cellar door, which was, probably not good for us. But Grandma was always spoiling us.
Grandma didn't pay the dental bills.
Yeah, no, Grandma's been amazing. She still is.
Do you want, and Isabel, unfortunately Isabel, the other granddaughter, could not make it today, so she was going to be here but had to work. So she had a little story, but we can't do that one.
She'll be returning to the winery to do vintage this year.
Yeah, so a little bit of a family thing, so doing vintage. But if there's any questions that anybody does have today, just send them through, and Lucy and I will get back to them at some stage after we've finished today. But that's pretty much all we need to say. Is this will be released at the end of the month. C.M.T standing for Christine Mary Thompson, and it's our 2016. There will not be another one until 2024, so it is quite unique. But thank you very much for joining us today. We just really wanted to say thank you to Chris for what her contribution to the business has been, alongside her husband Viv, and enjoy